it feels like the way is being paved to give Trump a chance to actually have a good shot at this. And everything that, kind of like in 2016, all the things that his opponents, they'll launch an attack, they'll hit fire, and the torpedo will go out, and they'll sit there and go, we got him now. And then the thing will like spin around and like come back and hit them or blow up over here, and then and Trump's just dancing between the raindrops.
The Hudson-Mekeland podcast.
So we're on lawnmowers in a garage.
It's shop talk.
It's shop talk. Here we go. So we got a lot of shop to talk. I gotta tell you, I feel a lot better sitting here in this weather than I did last week sitting at the legislature to the storm we were going through there towards the end. That was a hell of a thing.
It was long, and it was chaotic. You know, I had many newer members going, what's going on? I'm like, I've never seen this before. And last year I said the same thing to them. I've never seen this before. There's a lot of new, never seen befores.
Yeah. I don't even know where to even begin. I mean, I suppose you could begin at the end, right? So the last hour. And it was like not the last few minutes, but the last hour. So at like 11 o'clock at night on Sunday night, when we have that midnight constitutional deadline to be done legislating, right, that's when they shoved through that, depending on your perspective, 1,400 or 2,800 page, 6.5 inch thick when you print it out, grand theft omnibus tax bill. And they just shoved it through, ignoring about a half dozen parliamentary rules, House rules, in order to get it done. And it's just, I understand that you have to govern, but you had 2 years to do it, right? Like, there was no reason why the process had to end up being such a train wreck at the end, other than the just complete and total mismanagement of the legislative process under a trifecta, where they had
Control the House,
total
the Senate,
control,
and the governorship
to do whatever it is they needed to do in order to effect what they intended in the proper way. And so there's this weird effort after the fact of them trying to put out the narrative that Republicans filibustered and that's the reason why everything collapsed in on itself. And it's like, what are you talking? First of all, Senate was in recess more than they were in session, it seemed, in the final week. Certainly in the last couple of days, they took all of Saturday off.
which it was right around 9:30 when they went into recess. They did one bill,
Yeah.
and it was a bipartisan bill, because you need 34 votes to make anything pass. And then they were in a standstill because one senator, which you pointed out, Senator Omar Fatah, chose to not show up.
Right.
And until he got what he wanted, he would not come back, which was somewhere around 9:30 at night.
Yep.
And then they went till, I believe, 7 o'clock in the morning. And then they adjourned and then came back at 9 in the morning. So they had like a 2-hour break. We had about a 3-hour break right in there, 3.5 maybe. Because we were literally in limbo all day waiting for them, because there were so many things where we were waiting for them to come from them to us. And then we had so many things that needed to be sent to them, but they weren't doing anything. And yet I've heard from people that we were filibustering, but what they're not factoring in is they didn't have, there was no Senate all day Saturday. Then comes Sunday, I've heard from people who said, you know, we talk about hamburgers.
That was on Monday. That was 7 days or 5 days prior.
Well, okay, but it was farming on Sunday. We kept talking, there was many farming stories. One right before this all happened, because I think it was Tom Murphy, Representative Murphy.
Agriculture bill.
No, I get that. But they let us keep talking, and so the way that some of the public perceived it is, they in their mindset, we're sitting there telling farming stories. And what people don't understand is, they were waiting for their bill to get compiled, and until they got word that it was all packaged up somewhere, I'm assuming the revisor's office, compiled it all, and once they had that word, then they shut down the stories. It wasn't the farming stories. It wasn't that we were dragging it out. They could have shut it down at any time. They didn't have a bill. In fact, when they had and did shut everything down, there was no bill. There was no bill in paper print. There was no bill electronically available. There was nothing. So they voted on a bill that did not exist with no review whatsoever. I mean, back when Nancy Pelosi said you got to pass it to see what's in it, I do believe they were handed a copy of this bill maybe an hour or two before, and it was very significantly a huge bill. We didn't have anything. In fact, we didn't even, I believe if you went to the website, it said not available. Like the whole website was down. You know, our immediate access where we can start reviewing things. So that's where this was a little more interesting than the norm, because they didn't have anything to verify, which I'm guessing they didn't care. They were being told by leadership, it's good. We got everything we wanted in there. But we had nothing, and to this day, I don't know that we really know fully what may have all been slipped in there. They said there was 9 bills in there, I believe is the number. Some of those bills were omnibus bills by themselves. They had 3 different committees worth of bills that all got compiled into one mega bill. Now, did anything else get slipped into this thing? We don't know. I know staff's pouring through it, but it is, as you said, I think it's 1,832 pages, or 1,432 pages, but it's also double-sided, so I'm not sure if that means it's actually 2,862, if you do both, or if it's 1,430 front and back, if you will. At this point, because when we left that night, there was not a copy available. It appears they had one in the after press conference, but by then, you and I had already left.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it was a jumbled mess, and certainly you can't argue that it was representative democracy, because that's not how that works, right? Like you can't have it, even, and nobody's arguing that from the minority we should get what we want, because that's not how majorities and minorities work. But you're still supposed to know what you're voting on, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't think we even were on the board for that final vote because we refused to participate in the farce of a process. But even if you were to count it as a vote against, it's not even a vote against. It's a protest against the fact that you don't know what you're voting about.
Whether you're voting for or against, and I think there was a few, but also we could not hear the speaker, we could not hear the chief clerk, what they were even calling out.
Right.
So we didn't even know, because they voted like 3 things through rapidly, and it was incredibly loud in there. And so it was an interesting, to say the least, the way they did it. I mean, and as you said, there was parliamentary, point of personal privilege. There was division was called, which is non-debatable. Everything must stop until that's dealt with. They totally ignored that. I mean, there was several of them, and they just ignored everything. So that's the interesting part. And now what we'll find in the days to come, what all may or may not be in there, what may have been slipped in, because all they said was these 9 bills are in there. Nowhere in that did it say there's not anything else in there. They didn't say this is the only thing in there. Yeah. So, because there was a couple years back, there was a bill slipped in the middle of the night, and it was for St. Paul. I think it was a $500,000 grant to St. Paul, and it was a Keoli-Her bill to do that savings account for all newborns. And it was slipped in the middle of an omnibus bill, like in the middle of the night, and nobody caught it right initially, because you can't read 400 pages in 32 minutes. Right. Even if you divide it into inches and you divide it up, you're still not going to get there.
Right.
And which is interesting because she works for the St. Paul mayor when she's not in session. So unique little things that can happen. But that's how that whole thing rolled, and unfortunately, it kind of put a black eye on politics as a whole. There are those that say that it was not very becoming of what how the Republicans handled the Senate, because they were screaming and yelling, which was very much the same as in the House. But we were trying to be heard, And again, they were ignoring everybody because literally as we were kind of wrapping up, they started the same thing all over again. It just half as many people.
I mean, when you're getting mugged, it makes sense to yell. I don't know. Like, seems like a pretty natural reaction. When order breaks down and you're the one who broke it, then you can't expect order. That seems to be pretty logical to me. But
Well, yes, that would be the case. So this is where we're at, and people have asked me, do you think the governor will call a special session for a bonding bill? I say no. They got a couple $2 billion last year.
yeah.
They tried to pass through a capital investment bill. They got it through the House. They initially said they got it through the Senate until what do they call? We have a chief clerk. What do they call theirs? In the Senate?
I forget the secretary.
Secretary of the Senate, yes. And he turned around and said, no, actually, we're past midnight. It didn't make it in time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know on what basis, because in order for there to be a bonding bill, it needs to be, I think it's 60% or something along those lines.
Yeah, they require 12 of our votes.
Right. So I don't know who the 12 Republicans are in the House who, after what we just experienced, would be like, oh yeah, Governor Walz, I want to sit down and negotiate with you in good faith because you're a real good faith kind of guy who likes to work above board. And like, are you kidding me? Like
Yeah.
these people are completely untrustworthy. Why would you give them an inch on anything? I mean, and again, it's not us that they're being dishonest with. It's the people who we represent. You take the senators and representatives who have Republican districts, that's 48% of the population of the state of Minnesota that was just flicked off by the trifecta. And so what we're dealing with, I call it sheer flagrant hubris, where they've just developed this arrogance and this attitude that is Teflon, where they think that they're never going to be held accountable by anyone. They've had executive control of the state for decades, and they've used that time to populate the judiciary with all their own people. Every commissioner, every agency, bureaucracy, commission, task force is all populated with super hyper woke left-wing activists. And so there are no checks and balances anymore. Like, checks and balances aren't a thing in the state of Minnesota. And they know that. And so they proceed with this kind of naked arrogance that is completely dismissive of anybody who has a different opinion, certainly the minority, certainly Republicans. And so at this point, complaining about it, cathartic as though it may be, ultimately what needs to happen is they need to be defeated. And they need to be defeated in a major way. I mean, we need to, I'm excited about the prospect of Donald Trump targeting Minnesota, which he has said that he's going to do. The RNC saying that they're going to bring investments to this state. Royce White, an incredibly unconventional candidate for U.S. Senate, who has his issues, but we live in a time where candidates with issues become this sort of wild card where anything can happen. And the potential synergy between a Royce White and a Donald Trump, after what we just saw in this legislative session, I mean, this might be a magical mixture where we flip the state red. I mean, we're not going to get the governor's not on the ballot this year, the Senate's not on the ballot this year, but there's a couple things that could happen there.
2 of them.
Right?
Could be.
So in the best case scenario, we could flip the entire legislature, hand the state over to Donald Trump, the electoral votes, and make pathways into communities that we have not had access to before on account of Royce White.
Well, okay, and look at what Royce is putting out on his social media. He's actually, he's getting the mainstream media is attacking him for different minor issues, I would say. Bad debt or what have you, or unpaid bills, unpaid child support. I mean, not to say that it's a good thing, but they're going to pick out any little thing they can find, and he's hammering back, he's firing back, and he's not afraid of it, and he ends everything with Godspeed. So you have that, and then look what happened in the Bronx yesterday.
Yeah.
So the mainstream was saying like 30,000 people. The U.S. Marshals declared at some point yesterday that They thought it was around 156,000 people in the Bronx. And if you look at multiple interviews that were done out there, people that say, I'm a lifelong Democrat, this is not a Democrat-Republican thing, this is we are losing our country thing, and I'm voting for Trump. And there's multiples of them, of all these interviews that are out there. And it's one of the most, I've been saying it for the last several months, this is the most amazing time to be alive. History books are gonna get a lot thicker in the next 6 months, because there's gonna be pages and pages written about this. And I don't know what all they're gonna throw at it, but they're gonna throw something at it, and they're gonna keep throwing something at it.
Well, and I've had, to stray into the spiritual just a little bit. I've had the sense for a long time, because you go and you read like those biblical accounts of like the conquest of Joshua, where he would go from town to town, and what would happen is they'd be facing overwhelming enemies, overwhelming enemy forces from a conventional perspective. Like you just look at the numbers and you say, we're not going to win. But they would win time and time and time again. And the way it would happen would always be the same. As they would approach the city, there would be confusion in the ranks, and the men would lose their fighting spirit, and all these like little miraculous things would go the right way for the underdog and the wrong way for the folks who should be winning, and they would prevail. And I've always I have felt that in 2022 in particular, that dynamic was almost shifted the other way. That it was kind of like the sin of Achan. There's this whole story of this guy who stole stuff that didn't belong to him, and as a result, for a period of time, the Israelites were cursed and they couldn't defeat their enemies because this guy had this sin in the camp, right? I felt like there was something analogous to that was going on in 22, where there was every reason to believe we should have won in 22, and it didn't happen. Everything went the wrong way. And now it feels like there's a turning, like things have kind of shifted to where all of these attacks, I mean, you look just at Donald Trump, all of these attacks that they've been launching against Donald Trump, they're just kind of like clumsily falling apart, like this Cohen thing in New York, right? Right. And it's like stupid stuff too. Like, how do you screw up? And it's not like I'm wishing them well by any means. I want them to fail. But like, just from an objective dude, how do you testify in such a way that it not only exonerates the guy you're going after, but it criminalizes you? Like, are you kidding me? Like,
what's the one question you're never supposed to ask? Whether it's in a courtroom or on the House floor, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to.
You don't know the answer to, yeah.
And to put somebody forward, and Cohen is in this case, and like, do they not ask him these questions previously if this is the prosecution's key witness, and to know what his answers are going to be, because he literally undermined everything.
And it's not just that. I mean, you got judicial decisions to defer on some of these trials until seemingly after the election, and it feels like the way is being paved to give Trump a chance to actually have a good shot at this. And everything that, kind of like in 2016, all the things that his opponents, they'll launch an attack, they'll hit fire, and the torpedo will go out, and they'll sit there and go, hey, we got him now. And then the thing will spin around and come back and hit them, or blow up over here, and then and Trump's just dancing between the raindrops.
Is it kind of like the parting of the Red Sea?
Yeah.
Since you wanted to go there before,
yeah.
I mean, all of a sudden the path is there.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And it's not, people early in Trump's administration, he would have these tweets that would agitate people.
Yeah.
And people would ask why. And I learned early on, give it a week or two and watch and see what happens. Because if you criticize it, a week later or 2 weeks later, everyone, oh, he was right. And now, I don't know if this guy is that dang good at it, that smart at it, or it's just a intuition, but or it's stuff that he knows he can't say, but he's trying to get as close to it as he can, kind of thing. And then it always seemed to just give it a little time. And it's interesting to me, And I don't know if you saw James Comey's interview recently, I think it was on CNN, where he said they absolutely have to vote for Biden because Trump is going to dismantle the DOJ and all the three-letter acronyms and go after these people. And it would be reckless. And he had not the greatest people before. The previous administration, he'll have even worse ones now. So it's like they're building the case for exactly what they're doing because he's afraid, or he's making the case that if you don't vote for Biden, they're going to come after us, and making that to be a bad thing when they're doing the exact same thing to him now. Mm-hmm. You know, no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute this case under the Hillary stuff, which is really interesting because would a reasonable prosecutor take on some of these cases that they have against Trump when you actually start taking them apart piece by piece? And if you listen to the testimony that Cohen's been giving, would a reasonable prosecutor take that on? Or is it a prosecutor that's being put forward to make sure they don't get a Trump so that the supposed reasonable prosecutors don't get outed?
I don't know. I mean, we're at a point where anything can happen, and a lot of things need to happen. The big question is what happens after V-Day, right? Like the victory comes. What's that second term going to look like?
Well, can you imagine just the following days, based on even in 2016, look at the protests that happened in D.C. because they couldn't believe he won. There was all the pink hat things going on. There was the church that got burnt down by D.C. or by the Capitol. There was all these things that took place. So if, depending on how this all plays out, I mean, what's it going to look like then?
I feel like we're turning a corner on that kind of stuff, though, because like look at what's happened with these campus protests. You had, what was the school that you found out?
University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Yeah, so tell people what they did.
So they completely defunded diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and put an end to all of it.
Yeah.
And then they took the $2.3 million that was budgeted toward that and put it towards campus police and law enforcement because they've had it. And UNC Chapel Hill is not a small, unknown, nobody school. It's not like an outlier.
Is it known for its deep conservatism and being like a big red institution?
I would say no. It's not a bastion of conservatism by any means, but they also see that this is not what they voted for, if you will, or bargained for, because it's just complete, utter chaos. And at the end of the day, I think they have 30,000 students there, I believe.
Yeah.
And so you do the math of what it costs to go to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm sure it's not exactly one of the cheapest schools. I want to say it's one of those like 80-ish thousand a year ones. I'm guessing. I don't know that to be factual, but it's up there. I know that. It was in the article. Well, you do the math. What do they want to risk? A significant poor population of those parents saying, I'm done with this. I'm not spending this kind of money to have my kid not be able to get to class or be distracted by all this nonsense.
And that's what I kind of feel. I feel like we're turning a corner culturally where, you've got Democrat mayors who are speaking out against illegal immigration because they're seeing the impacts on their cities. You've got these campus protests that are being shut down in a lot of places, and people are just like, we're done with this. I mean, the University of Michigan had a statement, and it was kind of funny. You start reading it, and you're like, oh, they're caving for like the first 3-4 paragraphs, and then all of a sudden it pivots and goes, yeah, but we really got to draw the line at all this nonsense where we're keeping people from going to class and disrupting school operations and blah, blah, blah. So you realize that they were just covering their butt in the first 3 paragraphs, waxing eloquent about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, which is a non-issue. And that's one of my pet peeves is none of this has anything to do with your freedom of speech. You can get on a podcast and talk about how much you love Hamas all day long. That's your right. What you don't get to do is set up a camp in the middle of campus, violating school rules, and then threatening people and vandalizing and trespassing, what have you. That is not speech. The two things have nothing whatsoever to do with one another. One is expression, the other is conduct, behavior, in violation of the rules. And so it kind of bugs me that people have to feel like they have to preface taking action by affirming, no, we're really about free speech. The one has nothing to do with the other. This is not free speech. This is criminal conduct, criminal behavior, and organized criminal conduct that somebody coordinated and paid for. These people should have RICO cases put up against them. I mean, people should be going to jail. Their lives should be ruined for coordinating and paying for the criminal disruption of lawful conduct on public campuses. That should go without question. I mean, but I'm getting off the reservation. My original point was, I feel like there's a turning point happening right now culturally where even folks on the left are sick of the BS. They're sick of the woke nonsense. And I mean, look at Bill Maher. The degree to which it's been carried, they're saying, guys, I'm a liberal, but this is nuts. And the problem with the Democratic Party, including Joe Biden and his administration, is that they are out over their skis on that. They have already pushed all in on the woke stuff to the point where they can't pull back now. Certainly not before the election. And so if you're a liberal who says enough is enough, maybe you're staying home. Maybe you're not casting your vote this year.
Well, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier with all these interviews that were done yesterday in the Bronx prior to this speech happening. And there's a lot of them out there. And they're all saying that I'm not a Republican, but I'm voting for Trump. And in fact, there was one gal that went on that not only said that, but she said, vote AOC's ass out. And then she talked about the mayors and city council because they've done us no favors. And she went into it in it was well said from a simplistic form. She's not super political, put it that way. It doesn't articulate all the specific words exactly right, but you know exactly what she's saying, and she's had it. And there's so many of these, and people that are saying the same thing. I do think there's going to be a landslide in this thing to some extent with this many other people. I'm not promising a red wave. Everybody's got to go vote. But if they are disenfranchised and it's clear that Biden's not doing well in the polls, so it'll be interesting to see what they do at the DNC convention. Do they swap them out? Do they put somebody else in there? And who is that somebody else? I don't know. But there's a lot of chatter about it. But the people are looking for something completely different. And right now, Biden's not it. It's not what they want going forward. It's not the mayor of New York. It's not, all these people that have run these cities down. I talked to you yesterday. So I had a constituent reach out to me who apparently was dead, which was really interesting. I couldn't return that phone call fast enough. So in his 80s, and apparently the Social Security Administration, the IRS all decided he had been deceased. And so suddenly his wife was notified, which I guess would be his widow, sort of, that she had to pay money back because you get only a percentage once the one is deceased. And then his pension was cut off from a 30-plus year career from a major manufacturer. And, not cut off, because I think it was a 65%. But and so the federal side he had fixed, so he was only half dead when he came to me. And that's literally how the message came through. He's only now half dead. Because the local congressman staff took care of the federal side, but now it came to me in the regard of Minnesota Department of Revenue, Secretary of State, which is really interesting. It started in September of 2022 when this notification came, and yet he was able to vote in 2022, even though he was dead. And he was able to vote in the primaries we just had a month or two ago, but yet the Minnesota Department of Revenue will not accept his tax returns because he's dead. So I kind of chuckled and said, well, I'm sure the Secretary of State doesn't mind when dead people vote. I don't know. So we were dug into that. I verified with the county that they don't show him as dead through the recorder's office and the auditor's office, and everything is apparently all good on that end. So we're just trying to backtrack now. The interesting part, though, he was transferred here from Detroit, Michigan, because he worked for a major automaker. And back in 90s, I believe he said, no, 78. And he he was here for 3 months, and then they put him up in a hotel and gave him a company car to, build up the auto manufacturing here. And he would call his wife, who was still back in Michigan, and say, it's really interesting here because you turn on the radio in the morning on your way to work, and there's not a report of 2 murders every day from yesterday like there is in Detroit. And he's like, I think it's a lot safer here. This is before the Wall of America, you know? And so it was in that era somewhere, but and so they obviously, maybe it must have been closer to right before the Mall of America, because he cited the hotel they put him up in, which used to be on the grounds of where the Mall of America is now. It's right across the parking lot from the Met Center. But just to listen to somebody, you know, obviously 30-ish years older than I am, talk about how much safer it was here than there, and now look at where we're at now. Because I was saying a decade ago, we're going to be exactly like Detroit, and it's not going to take long. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of there.
Oh yeah, and we're going to continue on that trajectory, and get as bad as Detroit got, because they're doing nothing to bend that curve back in the right direction. In fact, they just keep doubling down. You know, more rent controls, more, you know, less police. It's just, it's unbelievable. But I don't know. I don't know how much we're going to be able to intervene in that to do some preemption unless we get that almighty trifecta. So.
Well, and if you look at, you know, like Baltimore, Detroit, which have become, you know, they're not in good shape, but there doesn't seem to be any effort to revitalize. It just seems to keep going down. And when you think it can't get any worse, it does. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what the plight long term. I mean, we have the history from these different major areas that were massive in the Great Industrial Revolution. Yeah. They were the leaders of what brought us to all this economic freedom and prosperity. Yeah. And now there's, you know, it's like I'm sure a lot of it is many people flee. They just, when they're frustrated, they just leave. And there are those that are economically stuck. Mm-hmm. And if they vote to change it, then they lose the little bit they have, mm-hmm. whether it be welfare or Section 8 or vouchers or EBT, whatever. And so they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, and then just the moral decay and the physical decay of the buildings. I mean, you see that. There was a recent video that was posted, I think it's from 29th to Blaisdell area, all the encampments down there. Yeah. In South Minneapolis, all in the Uptown area. And it's I mean, 10 years ago, it was nowhere near this. It was a very vibrant area where they had the Uptown Art Fair, and it was a very diverse community. And now it looks like a third world country, sadly.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, in the civil rights era, the premise was desegregation, right? And the idea, like you talk about busing, the whole idea there was, in order to improve the lives of black people, we're going to get them mixed in with the majority population, and in that way lift up the boats, right? Now we seem to be going in the opposite direction, where to the extent that there is any effort to revitalize communities that are dealing with degradation, it's called gentrification. And you get accused of, like, the better you make the community, the worse it is in some people's eyes, because, well, now you're pricing out the people who live there. And it's like, well, so you want it to be crap? Like, what's I don't understand. Like, what is the process here that is going to result in things getting better and staying cheap? Like, that's not how the world works, right? Like, you actually have to, if you're going to improve the quality of something, then you're going to raise the cost of it. That's how that works. But
you heard some of this. I mean, I touched on some of this on the floor, because they're raising the cost of home ownership exponentially. But last year they put $2 billion into housing, but that only goes to those that they deem are applicable to get those grants to buy down what they made too expensive. Right. Which means they then become dependent on these programs, so they can even potentially afford to put a roof over their head rather than live in a tent. And for those that are not familiar, we live in Minnesota, 34 degrees below zero, actual temperature, not wind chill, is not an uncommon thing. A tent in Minnesota absolutely sucks.
Doesn't work. Yeah.
And then in the summer, you know, you can have very hot, and you can have some very violent storms. There is nothing good that comes from a tent, in my opinion. I tried it years ago when I was young, and then I went to the hard shell, And I said, I'm never going back. So you think you're going to see me in the Boundary Waters canoe area trying to haul my camper on a canoe? It's not happening.
That's a good place to leave it for now. I gotta see a man about a horse in about an hour and a half. So.
The Hudson-Mekeland podcast, with hosts and Minnesota State Representatives Walter Hudson and Shane Mekeland. Follow, subscribe, like, and share to show your support. On X, find Walter at Walter Hudson and Shane at Shane Mekeland, spelled Mekeland.